Divine Nutrition Products believes in supplying the consumer with the highest quality products available. Their natural isolate line of protein is comprised of whey protein isolate made from grass-fed protein, featuring brand new flavors like vanilla peanut butter and pound cake. Divine Nutrition Products is the preferred supplement of rising IFBB Pro Figure champion Sydney Gillen, winner of the 2016 Miami Beach Muscle Pro.
Hey, this is Sydney Gillen, IFBB Figure Pro champion. I love Divine Nutrition products, especially the pound cake as soon as I get that one, but my favorite right now is vanilla peanut butter. It's so delicious.
Visit us at divinenutritionproducts.com. Welcome back to the Florida Physique Report, and my special guest today is coming all the way from Australia, my friend Wayne Gallasch, who runs GMV Productions, which is basically a series of muscle videos, Wayne, that you've spent really a lifetime filming, and I don't know how many people are aware of it, but I've been a big fan of your work since I was a kid, since I was a teenager. When you started selling your movies. They were a movie where you put them reel to reel, and I bought several of your movies back then, and then of course you went to VHS tapes, and now you've got them on DVD and also download. So you've got really a lifetime of work that you spent filming people. So welcome to the show, Wayne, and I'm glad we got a chance to finally talk.
Yeah, well, good. It's fun to catch up, and particularly as you've known my work for so long, going right back to the film days. That's where it all started. Really back in the early 70s and in the late 60s only in Australia. So it's good to have somebody that has such a long interest, such as you have.
Yeah. So how did you get started interested in bodybuilding, Wayne? I mean, what was your initial interest?
Well, my interest was this. I was a very keen squash player, and one of my great rivals in the sport, he joined a gym because he thought, well, that would be one way perhaps he could just get a step above me, because we were very close in our ability and training. So I thought, well, if he's joined a gym, I don't want to be left behind. So I joined a gym. And I just turned 22 when this happened. And what happened after a very short time in the gym, I noticed quite rapid improvement in the body and or the physique, and people in the gym started to encourage me to go in a competition such as the gym competition. And so after about a year, I went in the gym competition and happened to win it. And from then on, I just kept training for improvement in the gym. And although I still played squash, that was became secondary, and I continued to push on in the gym with bodybuilding contests in mind, and then I also did powerlifting contests as well.
Okay. What year was that, Wayne?
This would have been 1965, 66.
Okay.
Yeah, mid-60s.
So how did you get into to start to film and photograph the bodybuilders of that era?
Well, it came about because I saw a need. There was nobody really doing physique photography at all.
Yeah.
To do my early photographs, I used to set up the camera on a tripod. I don't think it had a timer, and I used to get my wife then to click the shutter for me to take the photos after I had set them up. And I then also found that in 1967, for example, Dave Draper came to Adelaide guest posing. And he was the first American to ever do a guest posing tour of Australia. I don't know if you knew that.
No.
And so he came to our state championships, and I was runner-up. And I do not have a single photograph from that contest or showing Dave Draper and myself on stage. And that's a loss that I often think about. There was just nobody to do it. So I started to take photos of my friends from the gym. This was in 66, 67.
Okay.
And because there was nobody to record our progress. So that's how things started. And then I hired a film camera and started to do film, but I didn't actually own the camera at the start. And I sent in a photograph to one of the magazines. Probably it was Iron Man or it was Health and Strength. To go with a little article I'd written about training, and I was encouraged by Puri Rader to keep going and do more photography of the events in Australia, and he said, why don't you look for some of the top bodybuilders, people like Frank Columbira. So Frank Columbira was the first national level bodybuilder that I photographed and filmed in Australia, and although he may not be very well known in USA, he did place high in the NABBA universe a couple of years in a row behind Chris Dickerson. So that got me started, that and writing the articles for the magazines where they would ask for photographs. And Health and Strength magazine in England also gave me the similar encouragement to Puri Rader. And that editor and the boss of Health and Strength was Oscar Heidenstam, who used to run the Universe.
Yeah.
The NABBA Universe. He was the promoter of that and organizer. So in 1970, I was aware that the NABBA Universe Pro was going to be Arnold's last NABBA and last Universe contest, because it was obvious that he was going to be going 100% only in the IFBB after that.
Okay.
So I thought, well, this is my chance to film Arnold at his peak in his probably last UK and NABBA contest. So I got myself over to England with my camera, and of course by then I'd purchased my own film camera, and I discovered that you weren't allowed to take film or photos unless you're an official photographer. So I'm not one to accept a knockback or a no. So I went to the prejudging, and I can remember standing on a chair so I could see over the heads of everybody else. And I don't seem to have any photos from there. But when it came to the finals, which the finals were held the next day in a big theatre in London, so I took my film camera into the theatre in a brown paper bag, so it looked like I was just carrying a sandwich. And whenever they had security guards walking up and down the aisles, or the centre aisle, continually looking for people that were using cameras. So I had to whip out the camera at the right moment and put it away when they would turn around and start walking back. So that's how I was luckily able to record Arnold and Frank Zane, who won the amateur contest. And I was thinking, wouldn't it have been fate if the security guard was walking towards me at the exact moment that Arnold was posing?
Yeah, right. So
but luckily that didn't happen.
I've got that video, and you've got not only Arnold, but you've got Reg Park, and I think Dave Draper was in that show also, and
yes,
the amateur division was full of talent. You had Frank Zane and Chris Dickerson and Albert Beckles, and Franco Colombo.
Yes, and I think I think Franco was there, and of course, I think Franco Colombo and Frank Columbira, I think they were all there.
Yeah.
In that year, it was a fantastic year, and Albert Beckles looked amazing, but Frank Zane had just a little bit more balance and class, and so he took out the title, And what was interesting, they had a bikini contest, which was roughly like an early forerunner of the figure contest of today.
Mm-hmm.
And Zane won the bikini contest. So
right.
Frank and Christine both went home winners, and of course Arnold won his final NABBA Universe contest on that very day. So it was a historic occasion, and that was the beginning of my international filming of bodybuilding contests.
Now, the next year at the NABBA Universe, Bill Pearl competed, and he won his last Mr. Universe contest, his last competition, and he beat Sergio
That's
Oliva,
right.
and Reg Park was there. Now, by that time, did you get clearance to film that contest, or were you still sneaking it in?
No, by that time I had told them what I had done the previous year, because I was on good friendly terms with Oscar Heidenstam, and he told me that the reason they had the no photography ban in place was that they had some bad publicity from the press, who had come to their contest, shot film, and then poked fun at their bodybuilders and their competition.
Okay.
So they were protective against negativity. But when he realised that I was a genuine historian wanting to record their history and to preserve it for the future, he then welcomed me with open arms, which was a wonderful turnaround. And so that's how it got going from 1971 onwards. And I can remember getting the prime position to shoot that contest. At the prejudging, I had the centre front of the balcony with a beautiful view down to the stage without anybody's head in the way. And then at the finals, I had a front seat to film the finals, where Bill Pearl took out the final contest he competed in.
Yeah. So tell us your thoughts about that contest, Wayne, because that, of course, was Bill Pearl's last contest, and Sergio looked amazing, and, I've read some things about that, but you were there, so tell us what you thought of the show.
Okay, this is a mildly controversial contest, only because a lot of people who were not there, who are experts in writing in bodybuilding,
mm-hmm.
Have suggested that Bill Pearl had a lucky victory, and that really wasn't the case, because on the day I felt that Sergio was just a fraction off. It appeared to me he'd just arrived in England from USA, and he was carrying a bit of fluid and just looked a little bit soft and wasn't as sharp as he looked a week later, whereas Bill Pearl was he was at his peak. Mm-hmm. I don't think I'd ever seen him look better. And I can remember he was vascular, hard, very confident, and I felt he was a clear winner, even though Sergio was the one that had the reputation of having been 3 times Mr. Olympia. And some people said, well, Bill was never Mr. Olympia. But that's somewhat irrelevant, because the judges only judge what is in front of them on the day. Mm-hmm. And I felt that Bill Pearl was a clear winner and a worthy winner against Sergio, who was just not quite at his very best. And then in the shorter class professional, Zane was a very good winner there, and normally would have been compared with Bill for the overall award of the professional title. But as Frank points out, they forgot about him, and at the end of the show, they just announced Bill Pearl as the overall winner of the professional title for 1971. And my assumption would be that with hindsight, maybe the judges had been consulted without having put the two men in front of them and said, we all agree, don't we, that Bill Pearl's the overall winner? Because that's what I would have to assume might have happened. And but Frank Zane is right in also saying that he didn't get his extra moment of glory being compared with Bill for the overall title that year. But I don't think anybody had any doubt that Bill was not the overall winner. So that was the story of the 1971 universe, where, as I said, many people have unfairly criticised the victory of Bill Pearl, but these are primarily people who weren't at the actual contest.
Right. Now, at the NABBA Universe, I remember they would do the prejudging in sort of flat lighting, right? And the judges were right in front of them. Was that the case in 71 also? Because I heard some people say that the reason Sergio lost was because the prejudging is very long at those Navi Universe shows, and he wasn't able to hold his pump as long because he used to over pump for shows, and then Bill Pearl was he knew how to just get pumped up just enough just to look his best.
Yes, I would agree with that. It was long, and the professionals were always done last after all of the amateurs had been judged.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, it was a fairly long, drawn-out day, and I would say Bill knew better how to pace himself and how to prepare for a Navi Universe, because this would have been Sergio's first universe, but Bill had won a number of Navi Universes prior to this particular day. I think he had won possibly 3 previously, and he knew exactly how to prepare for England and how to prepare for the judging. So I think he had a lot better preparation in all areas.
Yeah. So Bill Pearl was a very professional bodybuilder on stage, right? I mean, I've heard a lot of people say that when you saw him in person, he was very magnetic and very powerful posing, and he did everything right as far as his skin tone and his presentation and everything.
Yes, everything you said is spot on correct. He was a true professional. In a strange sort of a way, he was a forerunner of Arnold, because Arnold learnt a lot from the way Bill Pearl prepared, with total professionalism, posing, attention to every possible detail.
Mm-hmm.
And although Bill Pearl was not so obvious in psyching people out, Arnold would do that in a more aggressive manner. Bill Pearl's aura and the fact that he acted and looked like a champion the whole time you saw him, that also had a big positive effect, I think, on his competitors, and of course it was a positive effect towards the judges.
So after that, what was your next big show that you did, Wayne, or your next big video?
Well, that's an easy and good question, because 1 week after the 1971 Navi Universe was the 1971 Olympia in Paris. And I went across with the British team, which was organised by Wag and Diane Bennett, and they were, close personal friends of Arnold, and they were running the IFBB in UK, and so they had a team, and I can remember the team, their star member was Albert Beckles.
Mm-hmm.
So we went over to Paris by ferry and by train, and went along to the theatre, and the event was being run and promoted by Serge Nubret. And he had built up the fact that this was going to be the battle of all battles between Sergio and Arnold.
Mm-hmm.
So Sergio gets to the contest and he finds out that he's banned, and he's not allowed to enter to go on stage against Arnold, because he had been suspended because he went in the Navi Universe the week before. Because Sergio said he didn't know about this, and he only got the information when he arrived in Paris. And Franco Colombo, who I believe was also entered, I thought, in the Olympia, he had been banned for other reasons, and I think they claimed that he was a professional, or he'd gone in an organisation that they didn't recognise, and so he wasn't allowed to go on stage either. So what happened, both Sergio and Franco came on stage as guest posers, looked absolutely fantastic, and I was able to film this contest, and I could see a huge difference in Sergio, because he had dried out, hardened, looked a lot better than he had looked in London the week before, and I can remember that the applause he got was equal to, if not greater than, the applause that Arnold got when he won that title. And of course Arnold was then the only competitor in the Mr. Olympia. So it was an interesting victory. Arnold looked absolutely fantastic. And if you were going to say, well, who would have won out of Arnold and Sergio, it's impossible to say, because you need to see them being compared side by side. But looking at them individually that day, it would have been an absolute toss-up. They just both looked at their absolute perfection peaks, and it could have gone either way, depending on the judges and personal preferences. But I saw that one as I'd say it was a draw.
Wow. How did you feel Arnold looked that year compared to when you saw him a year before in 1970?
I thought Arnold looked better.
Yeah.
I felt that each year from 70, 71, going on through, I think Arnold might have said that he liked his appearance in 1973 as the best he looked. Is that what you've heard?
I think he said he was the biggest in 71. I think he said he was like 250 pounds. That's what I read before.
Well, that could be correct, yes. Although he was big in Paris, 71, he was certainly not in any way smooth or soft, and he had pretty good separation, and as I said, he looked impressive, but we didn't get to see him in comparisons or compulsories that I can recall because he had nobody to beat.
He was the only competitor,
Yeah, so he did his posing routine, and he came out and he held up the check, and from memory, I think it was still about $1,000, which by today's standards, well, that's probably equal to about 10,000, but it was peanuts, really.
Yeah.
But the crowd was so large that they had people standing around the walls and at the back of the theatre. I can remember that quite clearly. And these days, you don't see people standing up at bodybuilding contests. It just doesn't happen, does it?
No. The crowds were more wild back then, I think, too.
Oh, they were. The amount of enthusiasm in that theatre was immense. I would say it probably held 2,000 people. And it was right in the centre of Paris, so it was a great venue, and everybody wanted to see Arnold and Sergio. And of course, thinking back to it now, it would have been one of the great confrontations of all time in bodybuilding.
Wow, what a shame. So the next year, Arnold and Sergio did meet in 1972 in Essen, Germany, and you have that tape also available, right?
Yes, I organised with one of my European friends to go along and film that, and he shot that on Super 8 for me and sent me the films. I just simply couldn't afford to do a trip to Europe because I did the 72 Nava Universe. I can't remember the exact date of the Olympia, but it was beyond my means, so I wasn't able to get it personally. But that was another huge battle, and looking at the tape or the film from that time, and which is now part of the DVDs. Again, it was very, very close between Arnold and Sergio, and of course, Arnold got the decision, and I believe it was like one person's vote that had him in front of Sergio. It was very, very close.
And then one of the most famous videotapes you've ever done was like a week, or no, only a couple of days later, right? When Sergio traveled to London and you were able to shoot him.
Yes, you've got your facts very, very straight. It was a couple of days after that 72 Olympia, and Sergio had come over, and he was with Wag Bennett, who seemed to be the guru who looked after the top guys. And Wag Bennett said to me, "Would you like me to organise this?" Or he had actually said in advance, and I said, "Absolutely, yes, please." So it was about the Monday, and I think the Olympia was probably on the Saturday. And so I went to Wag Bennett's house, and when Sergio came to the door, this was the first time I'd seen him up close and in person, because in 1971 I didn't really get close to him, but he opened the door and I couldn't believe it. The difference between his waist and his shoulder width was just staggering, and of course he was wearing one of his signature type T-shirts. And I'll never forget the impact that he made, seeing him at his peak in top condition and dressed like that. It was absolutely extraordinary. And so we went out and we had a shoot on the Wanstead Heath, which was like a park with a small lake in it, not very far away. And that shoot turned out to be an historic shoot. And unfortunately, the photos that I took that day, I loaned them to Wag Bennett because he had a magazine called Peak. So I think from memory, I even gave him the film out my camera because he wanted to get it quickly into the magazine. So unfortunately, the only copies I have from those photos are the ones that I've got back now from the magazine. So, these things happen. But anyway, the film is the more important thing. The moving image of Sergio pumping and posing that day, everybody still talks about it to this day.
Yeah, and I think that was his peak in 1972 because he looked incredible that year.
And by coincidence, it was the same year and the same month that I worked with Frank Zane outdoors in a park in London. So
Right.
it was just an incredibly fortunate year, 1972, because when Frank won the 1972 NABBA Pro Universe, I had this same type of shoot with filming of pumping, posing, oiling, etc. And we did that in this park in London called Hyde Park Square. And in those days, the contest, the finals, was a Saturday afternoon contest. And so Frank and I shot this in the morning on the way to the contest.
Oh, really?
And again, yeah, that would never happen today because the competitor would be too uptight
Right.
or too stressed or too focused. He would never do that on the way to a finals. But we did it in the morning, and then afterwards he put his clothes back on, and we called a taxi, and he and Christine, Zane, and I went off to the contest. And then about 2 hours later, Frank was announced the NABBA Pro Universe winner. So that was another very memorable day in that same period in late 1972.
Wow. What were your thoughts about Frank Zane that year, or when you shot with him?
Very professional. The one thing that I do remember that was fascinating, when I said to Frank, okay, we'll finish off this session we'll film your posing routine. And he said to me, how long do you want me to pose? And I said, well, a reel of film runs for approximately 3.5 minutes. So he said, okay, I'll do a 3.5 minute posing routine for you. And he did. And no pose appeared to be obviously duplicated. Everything flowed. He just did it as he went along and made it look professional. And I've never seen anybody do that before. So that's how we ended the session on that particular day, 1972.
Wow, yeah, I've heard that said about Frank, that he could, pose for many minutes and never repeat the same pose. And when you compare that to some of the bodybuilders today, I don't think they can pose more than 5 poses without repeating the same pose.
And another thing that I really would like to stress about Frank Zane, and when I look at most of the modern champions of today, and I'm talking through 212 class and the open pro men, most of them distort their faces as they tense and pose. And to me, this is not total control of the whole situation. And thinking back about Frank, he could be tensing as hard as possible, and his face showed a calm and relaxed pose. So he had something that most of the guys today can't duplicate.
Yeah. Now, 1972 was also the year, I think, that Arnold and Franco first came to Australia, right, and did guest posing.
Yes, that's correct. They came down to guest pose at the Mr. Southern Hemisphere, or Southern Universe, and that was held on the Gold Coast of Australia. And I was a judge at that event, so I thought this is going to be a perfect opportunity to work with Arnold. And he said to me, can we include Franco in the shoot as well? And I said, of course. So that's how it happened. And then on the morning after the guest posing, after the contest, we went to the hotel pool and we shot our historic outdoor posing, pumping and posing, and then duo posing with Arnold and Franco. And although Arnold looked pretty good on that particular occasion, he wasn't ripped or shredded because, of course, it wasn't a contest period for him. From memory, it was somewhere around about Christmas time. I've got the exact date, I'm not sure, but I know it was hot and he wasn't ripped, but he still looked very good and very impressive. And that was the third iconic shoot that I had in 1972, all with Olympia winners, with Arnold, Franco, Zane and Sergio were all Olympia winners. So
yeah.
It was a year that just happened by chance, and it was a year that one will never forget.
So that was around Christmas time, huh? And later in the year.
Yes, I seem to recall it was, I don't remember which side of Christmas it was, but I'm pretty sure it was close to Christmas time, and I'll have to check my records. But that would have been one of the reasons why Arnold was available to come, because it obviously didn't in any way conflict with his preparation for Olympia duties. So that's probably why he was available to do this posing tour.
Yeah. I remember that movie because that was one of the ones I bought when I was a kid, and I'll never forget.
Yeah.
You've seen pictures of Arnold and stuff, but that was the first time I ever saw a video of him, besides, of course, Pumping Iron. But I was just amazed at how incredible he looked. I'll never forget when the video opens up, he's just standing there, and he's just sort of almost like breathing, and his lats were coming out, and I was like, oh my God, and then he hit that front double bicep, and then he hit that 3/4 back, and it was just incredible to see in person. I mean, to see him on film.
Yeah, well, he was incredible to work with, and he was very businesslike too, because he said to me at the end of the filming, he said, I'm going to be very famous one day, and everything that he said to me that day came true, because he then later went into his film career, he became governor, we know he's had an incredible life, and now, of course, he's got these Arnold Classic contests taking place in 6 countries around the world, with the first one in Asia. That's the Arnold Classic in Hong Kong in August, will be his 6th Arnold Classic event in a different place. So he's still going strong and had a remarkable life.
Was that the first time you ever really had a chance to work with him one-on-one and talk to him, Wayne?
Yes, it was, because when I saw him in 1970 and in 1971, I was always front of stage, and by the time I'd pack up my equipment, he would have been whisked away and gone, so there was no chance to chat. But in 1972, I've got a lovely informal shot of myself on the day before the contest where we were discussing things, so that was the first time I've had a chat with him. But ever since then, although I've seen him on a number of occasions, many times the bodyguards have not allowed him to stop and chat with people, because he's always on his way to his next whatever it is. And I can remember standing next to Arnold at the Arnold Classic in Columbus a couple of years back when he was speaking with Mayor Coleman, the mayor of Columbus. So I thought, right, I'm going to get a chat with Arnold here. And the minute that the mayor said his last words, the bodyguards grabbed Arnold by the elbow and whisked him out of the hall, out of the backstage area. So Arnold has got so much going on that you can't very easily just have a chat with him, and everything has to just fall in place for that to happen.
Yeah. So what were your thoughts of Arnold when you got a chance to meet him that day in 1972 at the pool?
Well, my thoughts were, again, how totally professional he was in every way, because he was telling me a bit about his career that he'd planned out for himself, and of course his preparation for the guest posing was such that everybody thought he was fantastic. As I said, he wasn't shredded, but he still looked remarkably impressive.
Oh yeah.
Just every aspect of what he did was well planned, well thought out, professionally carried out, and I couldn't have asked for a better person to work with, and particularly as he brought along Franco Columbu, which was a bonus for me.
Yeah.
So that was my first recollections of Arnold, and then over the years, filming him in different appearances from places like from FIBO to his own contest in Columbus, Ohio. I've always been impressed by how busy he is and how hard he works and how little time he really gets to chat to people, unless there's something really specific that you're going to be meeting with to chat about to him. He hasn't got the time these days that he used to have back then, where he could stand and mingle with the fans. And of course nowadays the bodyguards have to have a high priority in his whole life.
Yeah.
So that's the change I've noticed over his career from, say, 1970 up to the present time.
Yeah, Wayne, I asked you this question when I saw you last weekend, and maybe you could just repeat what you told me. But I asked you, who impressed you more, Sergio or Arnold, because you saw both of them when they were at their peak?
Yes, that's a very good question. So I'll answer it this way. In actually meeting with them and standing with them up close, not when they're necessarily flexing or posing, the one that impressed me the most was Sergio, simply because of the shock value, the impact, the awe factor that you had when you saw him for this very first time, because of his genetic shape. And it was just absolutely freakish. And you've seen him up close.
Yeah.
Because of your Chicago connection. But in 1970, one, okay, I saw him at the distance from the stage, but in 72, when I actually met him, shook hands with him, he was the most sensational physique that I had ever seen. And I have never seen anybody that comes close to his look, his impact, his genetics, his V shape, everything he had, triceps, the lot. Then when it came to on stage, well, without doubt, the best physique I'd ever seen on stage, in stage presence, showmanship, being smart in everything, was Arnold. And probably imposing, because although Sergio posed well, Arnold just really had everything down to a fine art. And so we'd have to say that I'd have Arnold a shade ahead, particularly in the on-stage presence and in his gamesmanship too. He was smarter than Sergio, and that's just the way it was. So they were both absolutely the best in the world, but in two slightly different facets of the sport in my eyes.
Yeah. You said gamesmanship that Arnold had on stage. What would Arnold do on stage that maybe would put him ahead in a competition?
Okay, one of the things that he did, and he did this in the 1980 Olympia, he would slip in extra poses to show his best points. For example, if they were doing side tricep shot in the prejudging, at the end of doing the side triceps, he would slip in a sort of a twisting most muscular and little things like that. Mm-hmm. I can remember Oscar State saying to Arnold, no posing, no extra poses. And Arnold would just sort of wink at the audience, which they all loved it, and he would just keep on doing it. They didn't toss him out of the contest, but if it was somebody else and you broke the rules, people like C.F. Smith, I can remember him getting tossed out of a contest because he kept posing when they said relaxed or no more posing. So Arnold had little tricks like that, and he would psych out people like Mike Mentzer. He had a little feud going with Mike and got under Mike's skin, and he would sometimes, when people would walk off stage, he would do extra poses so that his rivals had just walked off and he would do a bit extra. So he was all the time smart to do something different to grab the attention of the judges. So that's where he had the gamesmanship and the smarts, and would think out ways he could beat his opponents psychologically as well as physically on stage.
Mm-hmm. So after 72, you were just covering the NABBA universe then every year, right, in London?
Yes, I did it every year up until 2010.
Oh, wow. No kidding. So you saw some really historic events then in the NABBA universe.
I did. I used to see the AAU Mr. America winner every year compete in the universe. So I saw some wonderful physiques over the years. One that I remember, Dale Adrian, springs to mind, of course, obviously. Frank Zane, when he competed in Franco, they weren't necessarily connected with the AAU, but in the 70s and 80s, up till about the mid-80s, there were the AAU Mr. Americas. Now, here's two that really stand out that you will know, and they were Jeff King and Joe Miko. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you ever saw either of those posts, but they were incredibly impressive, particularly Jeff King. Yeah. Because Jeff King had Tom Platz-like legs, and he had an upper body to match his legs. And in 1983, he was like on another planet above the rest of the competitors. Wow. And I think that was the best Jeff King ever looked. And from memory, I think he beat John Brown that year. So that was 1983. Right. Joe Miko was a couple of years later. Got a feeling that he might have only been second in his class at the universe.
Yeah, Mike Quinn beat him, I think.
That's right. Yeah, that's true. And Mike Quinn had a good IFBB career after that. But Joe Miko was, to me, was just as impressive. Rock hard, fantastic legs, good abs. A very bright personality, and I worked with Joe straight after the contest with a pumping and posing feature, and by that time, of course, I was shooting on video.
Okay. What did you think of Bertil Fox when he came along? Because he was really a sensation, very thick and muscular, and he was very young too, right, when he won the NABBA Universe?
Yes, he went through the ranks from being an outstanding junior champion right through to winning the professional universe. It's hard to categorise Bertil Fox. He was a type of physique and in a class on his own. He had the nickname Brutal Bertil, and that was the type of physique he had. It was very, very rugged, hard. There's nobody around today that I would say that reminds me particularly of him, but he was just absolutely amazing. Rock hard abs, big arms, big legs, and he would always come in great condition. And I remember in the 1978 NABBA Pro Universe, he was up against the hot favourite in Sergio because Serge had a massive, massive reputation. But Bertil Fox took him out that day, and Serge was very, very upset at being beaten. And I can remember he complained to the organiser, that was Oscar, the next day that it hadn't been fair because Bertil was on home territory in his own country, and perhaps that influenced the judges. But that was the way it went. I saw Bertil as a good winner that day, and he had an amazing career.
Yeah. Also, let's talk about one of your most famous people that you've ever filmed, which is Mike Mentzer, and you filmed him several times. And Mike was at his peak probably in the late 70s, and then he was also, of course, in the 1980 Mr. Olympia, which was his last show. So maybe talk about some of the times you filmed him, because I know those are some of your best-selling videotapes or DVDs.
Yeah. Right, well, the first time I worked with Mike was in July of 1977. And that was at the Marina Beach in California. And we started off shooting on the Marina Beach, then on the Breakwater Rocks. And then finally, as we were leaving that shoot, I spotted the oil well and the pump going up and down. So I said, hey, let's do a few photos over by the oil well, which we did. And Mike never said no. He never said, I'm too tired, I've had enough, could we leave that? So whatever I asked him to do, he would do it. So that's how we finished that session. And then a day or two later, we went up to Muscle Rocks, sort of Malibu direction, and we did pumping and posing up there on the exact spot where Arnold had stood for photography with John Bailick and possibly others, possibly Artie Zeller. So that was a very famous location, and that was the first time I'd been to Muscle Rocks. So we had a wonderful shoot up there. Blue sky, just perfect background, everything was wonderful. So then in 1978, I did a lot more work with Mike. In July 78, I did a gym shoot with Mike and Ray together, and we did it at Jim Morris's gym starting at midnight, so we could have the gym more or less to ourselves. And then a day or so later, we did duo posing on the beach with the two brothers, and I don't think that was ever done at any other time, certainly not on the beach. And they turned out to be quite famous photos, and they posed individually and duo at that time, both on the film and in photos. And then at the beginning of August of 78, I had my final shoot with Mike at his apartment. So we called it Pumping and Posing at Home. And he had a pair of dumbbells, and I went out to his apartment and we shot this. I took out a couple of movie lights and set them up and had a great shoot. And that was the last solo posing I had with Mike. But then in 1980, this is probably a fairly little known fact, he came to Australia to do a posing tour, and so I put him on in Adelaide. It was, I think, May of 1980, and I thought to myself he probably should be staying in USA to concentrate on preparation for the Olympia, but he did do this tour of Australia, and he was in fantastic shape, and so he spoke and then posed, and it was a sellout crowd here in Adelaide. And then some months later in the year, he came back to Australia again for the 1980 Olympia. So we all know what happened there. Arnold had him well psyched out, and Arnold got under his skin, and I don't think this had any influence on the final result. So it turned out Mike placed fifth, and he was bitterly disappointed at his placing because he was a defending class winner, Mr. Olympia.
Right.
Because in 1979 he won the heavyweight, and Frank Zane won the lightweight and overall Olympia. And people tend to forget that Mike Mentzer could claim, but he never did, that he was a Mr. Olympia winner, or class winner that is.
Mm-hmm.
So he was in with a good chance as one of the favourites for the 1980 Olympia. But it wasn't to be. He placed fifth, and he never competed again.
So what did you think of Mike when you were filming him in 77 and 78? Because he was really one of the most popular bodybuilders around that time.
Well, my thoughts were that he was the best amateur bodybuilder around.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure he was still classed as an amateur in 1978, although he may have been competing as a pro. I just don't remember the status, but he was one of the best bodybuilders on the planet at that time, and certainly in USA, because the only other people he would be compared with, perhaps by fans, would be people like, well, Arnold and Frank Zane. Although I don't ever see him really being compared with Frank Zane, because they were totally different types of physique.
Mm-hmm.
So Mike Mentzer was huge. He was very symmetrical. He had amazing calves. He was ripped, and he had a wonderful personality. He was just a good person to be with. So that's probably why it turned out that we got on well, and I did more photography with him than any other bodybuilder throughout my whole career. So then we can move to the year in which he died. I just don't remember the exact year, but he phoned me up a week before he died, and he told me that he was shooting this video on training, and we organised that I would be distributing it for him in the Asia Pacific countries, and he was very, very enthusiastic about it, and we were both enthusiastic because we'd always remained in touch and good friends. And then I get the fateful call that he'd passed away on the night of the shoot. I think it was a heart attack, and that was the end of that. So he had a rather tragic ending to his life, but he had a wonderful career.
Yeah. How about some other bodybuilders, like, how about Casey Viator? I'm sure you were able to shoot him, right? And you saw him in the 1978 NABBA universe.
Yes, I had two individual solo shoots with Casey, and the first one, it's rather interesting because I was in Florida just this last weekend. The first one was in Florida in 1978, and that was up at DeLand and also at Daytona Beach, because of course he was the number one boy for Art Jones.
Yeah.
So I came to Daytona Beach for a week, and I spent that time shooting with Casey in different backgrounds and different scenarios, and we had Skip Robinson also in the shoot, and then in some of the shoots we had Miss Olympus called Lindy Johnson. But primarily I was there to shoot Casey Viator, and he was in sensational shape. From memory it was June of 78, and I know it was as hot as hell. And standing in the sun doing photography is pretty tough in Florida at that time of the year, because when you're on a beach or whatever, there's no shade.
Yeah, right.
So you know what it would be like.
Right.
It's tough.
Yeah.
I did have another shoot with Casey later on, probably around about 1980 or 81, and that was on the Venice Beach in California. He wasn't quite as good, in my opinion, on that particular day, but he was still extremely impressive and rock hard.
Okay. So let's talk about the 1980 Olympia, Wayne. You were one of the few guys that I've talked to that was actually there at the show, because it was in Australia, your hometown. And, of course, this is probably the most controversial Mr. Olympia ever. It's one of the most talked about Mr. Olympias ever. I mean, here we are now in 2016, and people still talk about it. So tell us your thoughts on that Mr. Olympia in 1980.
Okay, well, it was somewhat controversial for a whole lot of reasons, but let's just try and analyse first of all the physiques, and then we'll talk about the politics after that.
Okay.
It was pretty clear from the beginning that it was a sort of a three-way battle, I thought, between Arnold, Chris Dickerson, and Frank Zane. My initial thoughts at the very start of the contest that day were that Chris Dickerson was perhaps a nose in front.
Mm-hmm.
Frank Zane just was perfect all over, but maybe didn't quite have the size, you could say, to match with Arnold. And Arnold's condition was good. His legs weren't as big as they had been in his previous Olympias. Some people said they were weak. I would say that they were okay. They didn't look obviously way out of proportion. His upper body was outstanding. His arm poses killed pretty much everybody. Mm-hmm. His double biceps and his twisting back poses, there was nobody that had a better version of that. So then it got right down to the nitty-gritty. Okay, let's think, why should Chris Dickerson win this, or why should Arnold win it, or can Frank Zane win it? Mike Mentzer, I feel, probably could have been in the mix for the top three, but I didn't think he was quite sharp enough and his abs quite hard enough for him to be a contender for the title. So I was comfortable if he had placed third, but he ended up fifth, as we all know. So then we come down to Chris Dickerson versus Arnold. Now, let's compare upper bodies and lower bodies first of all, because this is no doubt what some of the judges probably would have thought. Chris Dickerson had the better lower body. He had the better legs, better shape, better size, great calves. Then we come to the midsection. Okay, Chris was okay. He never really had a washboard midsection. Arnold's midsection, good. Not his best body part, but certainly not out of shape. And then we come to the upper body. The arms, twisting back poses, Arnold was clearly well in front on that. So you start to weigh up faults and weaknesses, good points, bad points. And as I saw it, after comparing these two and giving it a lot of thought since the event and looking at it on the film, I felt that Arnold just simply had the edge overall, taking into account the factors that I've just mentioned. Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of people are going to say Arnold got it because of politics. His friend was Paul Graham. He was Arnold. It's hard not to give it to a champion. All of those factors could have been a small influence in the judges' minds, but if the judges were truly judging what they saw in front of them, on that day, I was not uncomfortable with Arnold's victory over Chris Dickerson. It's very hard to, if you even want to say today, well, Chris Dickerson was better on the day. He was perhaps better in some body parts, but I thought that Arnold's better body parts outweighed the better parts of Chris Dickerson, and that's how Arnold got the title.
Okay. That's interesting you say that, because I've interviewed, I think I told you this when we talked last weekend, I've interviewed quite a few people who were at the show. Samir Bannout, I talked to Bill Pearl, Boyer Coe, Roger Walker, and they all said that Arnold should have placed like fifth or lower. Do you think that was just sour grapes? Do you think that was because they were competing against him?
I won't judge them and say sour grapes, but I do think that it's impossible to remove yourself in a subjective manner from that event when you're so closely associated with it. Yeah. Like, for example, I respect Bill Pearl's thoughts and comments, but he was the coach of Chris Dickerson, mm-hmm. and the guys that were in it, well, they're entitled to their opinions, but I don't agree with them. And in my case, I wasn't particularly friends with anybody in the contest. I'm just giving you my subjective thoughts as an independent person. The only person I probably really knew a little bit was Chris Dickerson from his Navy Universe days. So that's why early on I thought he was in with a good chance to win it. But I also knew Arnold a little bit too from having worked with him. Mm-hmm. And of course Frank Zane similarly. But I didn't class any of them as close friends, and so my thoughts are entirely unbiased and removed completely from the competitors and removed from the promoter of the contest, because although I knew him, again, he wasn't a close friend. He was just a guy from Sydney, and I lived 1,000 miles away in Adelaide. Mm-hmm. So people that were in the contest are entitled to feel whatever they feel. They would feel upset that they didn't place higher. But I think it's somewhat ridiculous if you were to suggest that Arnold should have placed seventh or something like that, because clearly that was not a realistic thing to say based on what we all saw on the stage.
Yeah, and I think you had a better viewpoint too, Wayne. I mean, if you were in the show and competing against Arnold, you're not going to be able to see how he looked, but you were sitting in the photographer's pit, and you had a good viewpoint of both the prejudging and the night show.
Yes, in fact, it was even better than the photographer's pit. I had a particular row and area just for myself, which
okay.
I had organised as part of the deal that I was at the event, and so I had the prime seat, in my opinion, in the centre of the row, right at the front. And I don't recall any other photographer either side of me. I was just there on my own with the prime position to shoot the contest, and I'd have to rate that as the greatest contest that I've ever been involved with, because
Really?
it's still so talked about today, and people are still buying the DVD of that contest today as keenly as if it had happened last year.
Right.
So it's been a remarkable contest, the way it's held its appeal and its interest for so long. And there was a documentary made, a sort of a behind-the-scenes documentary called The Comeback.
Mm-hmm.
And that also had a tremendous life and tremendous interest. And that showed some highlights of the contest, but it wasn't a contest video. It was a people behind-the-scenes type of video. And I understand that Arnold has now bought the copyright of that particular DVD. I think he now owns it. It was independently made at the time of the contest, and so it's now very hard to get copies of this particular DVD, because I think the last distributor has now sold out of all of the copies. So I hope to see that one will be back on the market in the future. So make a note of it, The Comeback. It's a wonderful, different look at Arnold, Tom Platz, and the whole contest. Do you have a copy of it?
Yes, yeah, I've owned that for quite a few years.
Yeah, I thought you would. But that's an excellent alternate view of the competition. And it also gives a little bit of an insight into how Arnold would psych out competitors and how he would think and how he would act. So I recommend that every bodybuilding fan should try and get hold of a copy of that. It's a great documentary.
Yeah. Speaking of Arnold's persona, do you think that just his charisma and his stage presence had maybe something to do with him winning that contest and pulling ahead of Chris Dickerson?
Oh, I'm sure it did, because it was obviously quite close between them, talking body part by body part. But when it came to the charisma and the on-stage performance, I think Arnold was clearly quite a bit ahead of Chris. I mean, Chris was not. I'm not saying that he was poor on stage, but Arnold was brilliant on stage, and he just stepped it up a gear, and he acted like a winner from the beginning to the end, and he turned out to be the winner.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just one of those things. I can't think of anybody who had a better stage presence and a better stage strategy than Arnold. And thinking about today, I don't think there's anybody that acts quite like Arnold on stage. Everybody's fairly straight down the line and do things by the books. If you want to think about Kai Green versus Phil Heath, for example, well, that might be the nearest you can get to a little bit like when Arnold would be psyching people out, but we haven't seen Kai Green now on the Olympia stage for a year or so, but that would be the nearest I could give you to somebody today where there was a rivalry right at the top would be Kai and Phil, so that's the nearest to those old days when Arnold was at his peak.
Yeah. Speaking of Arnold, we just had Muhammad Ali pass away a couple of weeks ago, and when you look at someone like Arnold or someone like Muhammad Ali with their great personalities, it's a shame we don't see more people in the field today, in the bodybuilding field, that have more personalities and put themselves out there like that. Don't you agree with that?
Yes, I do. The charisma and the personality cult of those past years is not there at the moment. And even Mike Mentzer had his own special charisma and personality. Of course, Arnold was the king of the cult. Ronnie Coleman had a little bit of it in a different way. But I can't think of anybody else very quickly that did have it. I mean, Dorian Yates was pretty laid back and a quiet sort of a person. Jay Cutler, again, a quiet personality, great physique, great guy. But as I said, Ronnie had a little bit of character.
Mm-hmm.
But since he has departed from the scene, and now Phil's pretty much a traditional bodybuilder. It's just not quite like it was in the golden years, and in some of the 80s even. There were characters in the sport that just don't seem to appear today.
Yeah, I just interviewed Dallas McCarver, who's an upcoming great physique. I think he's only 25 years old. And I was asking him about how he's going to do in the future, and was he ever going to win the Olympia? And he just sort of took a neutral approach and just said, I'm just going to do the best I can do, you know. And it's a shame that there's not more people out there like Ali or like Arnold where they boast that they're going to be the greatest. And, you know, you're saying that Arnold was talking about all the things he was going to do back in 1972 when he was only 25 years old.
That's correct. And I can think of another top bodybuilder who had a charisma and a presence and a confidence, and that was Tom Platz.
Yeah.
And although he got very close to winning the Olympia, he once said to me that not winning it didn't matter one bit to his career because he was enormously popular. I filmed him a number of times over the years. We were good friends, still keep in touch, and he was a guy that made a great career out of not being a Mr. Olympia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you probably saw Tom compete many times also, right, throughout the years?
Many times. Yes, I did. And the fans absolutely loved him, and he would play up to the fans with his poses and his personality, and he just had an extra something about him that was a bit different. And I hate to say this again, but none of the present-day bodybuilders seem to have that little extra touch of charisma and something special about them. They're all very, very similar today.
Mm-hmm. You think social media has anything to do with that, Wayne?
It's hard to say whether that could in any way be a negative or inhibit people, because if people want to be extroverts, social media is a wonderful way to get yourself out there.
Mm-hmm.
So if anything, you would think that would encourage charisma and maybe ego and so on, but I don't see it's making much difference to what we see out on stage and at the Olympia or in Grand Prix. There was another guy that did have great charisma, and he's making a comeback to the Olympia this year in Kevin Levrone.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. What your thoughts were on that?
And well, I just hope that it's not embarrassing. I'm hoping that he'll be in that top 10. A lot of people have asked me, where do I think he's going to place? I think he can place somewhere round about between 8th to 10th, because if you think back, in his last Olympia, I think he placed 6th.
Yeah, he did.
And that was like about 13 odd years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to be very hard to place really high. I would love to stickly. He'll probably place somewhere between 8th and 10th, and that would be regarded in my book as a pretty good effort. What do you think?
Yeah, it seems like there's two schools of thought.
Do you see him placing in the top 10?
I don't know, because I don't know what he's going to look like. I mean, it seems like there's two schools of thought out there among the bodybuilding experts. Some people think that he's going to pull an upset and he's going to win, and other people said he'll be lucky to place in the top 10. So, but I agree with you. Comebacks are tough. I mean, we've seen a lot of bodybuilders over the years try and make comebacks, and I would say almost every one of them failed. You know.
Yeah. I think the hardest thing for him is going to be to show size plus condition.
Mm-hmm.
He might come in with size, but it might be at the cost of the midsection.
Yeah.
In that case, he's not going to play the type. If he comes in with superb condition at his age, I'm not sure how he's going to hold great size. So it's a near impossibility to have great size and great condition, particularly when you're early 50s, as he is, and competing against the best professionals in the world. So I hope he can pull off a really good package. Everybody will say he didn't embarrass himself. And if he can do that, then it's a victory. And it will also be publicity for him for career, for his sales or whatever he's promoting and pushing, and social media. So I think that overall it's going to be a huge public relations exercise, and I hope it's a good one.
Yeah, you're right, though. I mean, he is in his 50s. He's not in his 30s or 40s, so the body does change no matter what you're doing. So that's going to be a tough road for him.
And the other thing, too, that the older you get, the harder it is to hold size in your legs. and I'll be interested how his lower body comes in, because I know his arms and his upper body will be good.
Mm-hmm.
But legs and midsection, I think they're going to be the area for him where he's going to have to, well, he's going to have to do well if he's going to put a total package on stage that everybody's going to say, wow.
Yeah, I agree. So what other highlights of, I mean, you've had an incredible career, Wayne, covering all these shows and videotaping so many people and so many icons. Are there any other people or events that you've gone through or seen that really stand out?
There's a person I would like to mention, and that's Linda Murray. Over the years, I've seen some amazing women's physiques, and she would be one that's probably impressed me the most.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say that Iris Kyle's physique has not been impressive, her track record has, but I preferred the look of Iris Kyle, and of course earlier on, Corey Everson had a great career, and I worked with her for 3 days solidly when she came to Australia, round about 1990.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a couple of the top women, and Juliet Bergman's another person that I admired and worked. I worked with her and shot some wonderful video with her. So they're just a few that should be mentioned. But let's just quickly think of anybody else that I may have overlooked. Well, Ronnie Coleman. I shot with him for 3 days doing a video called Ronnie Coleman on the Road.
Mm-hmm.
And he was training like an absolute demon with using weights that were just unbelievable. What we didn't show in that video, some of the time the weights were so heavy he had to lay down on the floor of the gym between sets.
Wow.
He just absolutely took himself to the limit. And I've never seen anything like it with the massive weights he used. So that was incredibly impressive, and that was shot just after his last Mr. Olympia victory when he came to Australia. And so I was working very closely with him for those 3 days. We split the workout over the 3 days so we could use as heavy a weight as possible in everything he did.
Mm-hmm.
By the time we got to the last day, I think he was just totally exhausted and totally spent. So that was a very impressive time.
Yeah, we forgot to mention Ronnie, because he definitely was one of the most impressive Mr. Olympias, one of the most impressive bodybuilders ever, for sure.
So over the years, you asked me, are there anybody else that I would like to mention? Well, probably I've been fortunate to do work with every Mr. Olympia winner, with 2 minor exceptions. And I say minor because in the case of Phil Heath, he's still going, so I might get to do something with Phil, but I haven't actually shot any one-on-one video with him. And with Lee Haney, again, the only video I shot with Lee was not at Olympia time, but when he was at FIBO in Germany, and then he came to Adelaide and he did an appearance for me and my partner, and we put Lee Haney on in a seminar and posing. So I've worked with Lee, but not actually in the gym. So every Olympia I've had the good fortune to work with every Olympia winner, including Larry Scott, when I filmed a seminar and a segment with him to portray his life career. I didn't actually film him in any contest, of course. The footage I have of him in contests was shot for me by friends. So that's something that I'm comfortable with. And with Dorian Yates, he had a DVD, Blood and Guts, and it was a 1-disc DVD, and the Blood and Guts part is his training. And then I got together with him, and I put together a 2nd disc, which was all of Dorian's contest career. So the Blood and Guts DVD now is a 2 DVD set. So it's his training and my record of his career with interviews and nearly of his Grand Prix victories and appearances. And that would be probably very close to my all-time biggest seller, along with the 1980 Mr. Olympia DVD. So I think that's a good way to sort of close up the career by mentioning those 2, because they would be the 2 of the DVDs that more fans have been interested in than possibly anything else. And then closely followed by Ronnie on the Road training DVD. That's up there, probably in the top 3 of interest to the fans. So they would be my big 3, I would think. And then not far behind was Mike Mentzer, but because his career was early compared with these guys, not counting Arnold, Mike Mentzer would probably be around about my number 4.
Okay. How about competitions, Wayne? Like of all the shows that you've seen, the Mr. Olympia, the Nava Universe, so many big events and so many historic events. Was there any one contest or two contests that really sort of stick out as something that was something special to witness in person?
Yes. Well, we've touched on two of them. That was the 71 Olympia. Even though it wasn't much of a contest with one competitor, it was something that was special and unique. The 1980 Olympia, that was just historic. And the other Olympia for me, which really stands out, was the 1999 Olympia, which Ronnie Coleman won in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
And the reason why that stands out, that was the first one in Las Vegas, and I've been going back there every year since then to work on the Olympia camera team. But in 1999, on the team, and that who I'd really like to be on the team, and he had offered me a VIP pass for some favours I've done. But I said I'd rather be working on the team than sit there with a VIP pass. So he said, okay, I'll organise that. So at the end of the 1999 Mr. Olympia contest, after the awards, they said to me, oh, by the way, Wayne, you and the interviewer are on stage now. So we stood in the middle of the stage, and there was an interview with Ronnie. They don't do it that way anymore, but I think I mentioned this to you. That was somewhat of a shock to me, because there I was. I felt in at the deep end, and my first Olympia that I was shooting officially on video, and that was a moment that I'll never forget. And of course, Ronnie had fallen to the stage on his knees when he was announced the winner.
Right.
And if memory's correct, Flex Wheeler was bitterly disappointed. I think he was runner-up.
Right.
So that was a moment that will stand out in my mind forever. And then the Olympia, when Ronnie equaled the record of Lee Haney, that was a special moment. So there's a couple of contests that really stand out. Nava Universes, well, there were a lot of them that were outstanding, but I just can't necessarily think of one other than probably 1970 when Arnold won his last one.
Right. And
of course Bill Pearl, say in 71. So they would be probably my two favourite Nava Universes. Then Arnold Classics, I'm involved with those DVD productions. I do remember Arnold congratulating Ronnie Coleman on the year he won his Arnold Classic in Columbus. I think it might have been 2001. Pretty sure that was the year. And I thought how brave Ronnie was to do the Arnold and then to have to front up some months later and do the Olympia, because most of the Olympia competitors find it's too big a task to do the Arnold and the Olympia in the same year.
Yeah.
It's very, very hard to win the double. And I remember too that later that year, 2001, I did think Ronnie struggled a little bit, and I put it down to partly because he had peaked at the Arnold and looked so amazing.
Yeah.
And then he had to peak. He had to peak again in the September or the October, whatever it was, for the 2001 Olympia. So that's an Arnold Classic that I'll never forget. And that was my first Arnold Classic in Columbus.
Oh, okay.
That was 2001. And I've been back there many times since, involved with the video production and the editing of the DVDs, which I do at this very moment. In fact, right today we are about to release the 2016 Arnold Classic Columbus. So that's right from the horse's mouth, the latest news. So That's what we're doing. That's what we're actually doing today. With the Grand Prix, I've had many pro Grand Prix that I've attended around the world. You've asked me what stands out. Well, I can remember particularly Kevin Levrone winning a Grand Prix in England, where he was absolutely sensational. His condition, his stage presence, his posing. It would have been in the 90s, I would say, but that's one that sticks in my mind. It was run up in Manchester, and Kerry Kayes was the promoter, and the English Grand Prix were absolutely fantastic. And another person who sort of gave me my break with the Grand Prix was Wayne D'Amelia. And in 1993, I said to him I'd like to do an English Grand Prix, because the guy who had done it the year before never released the video. So Wayne D'Amelia said, okay, I'll give you a try, meaning we'll see how you go.
And then after that, I never looked back because I just did Grand Prix every year from that time forwards. So 1993 was the beginning of my pro Grand Prix video times.
Okay.
And I've enjoyed the Grand Prix very much. And of course now the Australian Grand Prix is now called the Arnold Classic Australia, and we do that production every year.
Right. Well, Wayne, all these videos are available at your production, which is GMV Productions, correct?
Yeah, gmv.com.au, and downloads are from our other website, gmvbodybuilding.com. And if you go to either one of those sites, there's links to the other so that you can very easily find your way around.
Okay.
The downloads are the way of the future, particularly for a lot of people that want to have their video for instant viewing.
Right.
And there are a lot of people that still like to have a DVD to put on the shelf in their collection. It's going to be a higher quality production when it's on DVD or on Blu-ray. So they are still there for the fans, and we won't be changing that. And I've still got a wealth of material, features and things that haven't been released yet. So if I stop covering contests, I've still got plenty of stuff to keep going with. So with no plans to stop soon.
Right. Yeah, well, I for one, Wayne, congratulate you, and I'm glad you were around to record these icons of the sport, because if you hadn't done it, we wouldn't have this historic footage. And I encourage all the fans of bodybuilding out there to go out and go to your website and buy some of these, because you're never going to be able to find this historic footage anywhere except you. And now, even at the age of 74, you're still going strong. You're still doing this. You have no plans to retire. We talked about that over the weekend. And, you know, this is a passion of yours, and you're still doing it. And thank God we had somebody like you in the bodybuilding world, Wayne.
Well, I'm glad I was there in the early days, because back then nobody thought it was even worthwhile to record this history.
Right.
And I always had a passion that it would not only be worthwhile, but it would be greatly appreciated one day. And that has turned out to be correct.
Right. Well, I'm glad you were there, and I certainly appreciate all the work that you've done. And like I said, I think it'll stand the test of time, because if you hadn't been there, we wouldn't have seen Arnold or Sergio or Bill Pearl at their best. So I'm glad you were there to record that history.
Thanks, John, for your interest and for your long support of what I do. And I thank you too for publicising the sport, and also the way you keep the history of the sport alive, and that's really appreciated by me, and I'm sure all the fans. So thank you for that, and I also wish you good luck in your career, and you're competing again in a month or two's time, aren't you?
Yeah, in 6 more weeks.
6 weeks' time.
Yeah.
Well, good luck with everything. I know it'll turn out well, and it's been a privilege to be a friend of yours and to have known you for quite some years now.
Yeah, I feel the same way, Wayne. Thank you for joining us on FloridaPhysique.com and for the Bodybuilding Legends Show. And keep going, Wayne, and we'll continue to watch your many videos, and always be a fan of all the stuff that you've done in the past.
Okay, and thanks very much, John, for your interest, and we'll catch up again soon.
All right. Thank you, Wayne.